Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Conversations in Health, Global to Local. This is our fifth and final speaker of the semester. We are incredibly happy to have the Executive Vice President for Health Sciences here at Georgetown, the Dean of the Medical School, Dr. Norm Beauchamp with us. Norm is, I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years, and he has been a tremendous asset to our community, and I think you're going to really enjoy hearing his story as a physician and is now a leader in academic medicine. So
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm so delighted to be here, you guys, and want to make it valuable to all of you. So, yay. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Well, welcome.
And one of the greatest leaders I've ever met.
Oh, there you go. See, we pay each other well for this. It's part of the whole. It's part of the whole Jesuit tradition. And then we do have a special guest tonight. Before we start, Bill, do you want to quickly introduce yourself to the group? You've spent some time at Georgetown.
I'm Bill McMillan. I came here in 1964 as a freshman in biology and went to med school here on the clinical faculty in child and adolescent psychiatry.
Well, special guest, thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
So, our process tonight will be like as we do in each class. I'm going to spend a little bit of time with Norm talking about your career and how you got started and where you are today. Then we'll open up discussion to the four students who prepared briefing emails for everybody for tonight. And then we'll open up for a larger conversation. And I think we should have time for at least a few questions from our colleagues who are online.
Great. Yay.
So, Norm, welcome.
Thanks.
So we always start at the beginning. So I'd like to ask if you might share with us a little bit about your family, where you grew up, a little bit of how you got started.
It's great. And how much time should I take to answer this question?
Okay, take as much time as you
Okay,
should. Just
I
a little bit of background.
go on a little bit. So
How about if I'll cut you off if
you
we
do.
All right.
So I grew up at a farm in Michigan, St. John's, Michigan. My mom was a community mental health worker, and I would go to work with her, and I would see how much people struggled. And she said, you have to grow up to try to do something about that, and that your sense of urgency should be commensurate with the persisting struggle. So that's just something that I've kept in front of me, that you have to do more and better. Undergrad, 20 minutes from my house, Michigan State University. Go green. Nope.
Well, before we get to the Spartans.
Too fast.
Tell me a little bit about growing up on a farm.
Oh, I will. So what happened was I was...
Did you do some things other than just driving to the store to get your food? And
my father, we were in Boston, and my dad came home and said, you're spoiled and so's your brother. And I said, what does that mean, Dad? And I was 7, and he said, we're moving to Michigan, we're buying a farm, you're going to raise cows, chickens, and horses, your mother and I are going to go to work. I, of course, said, well, what about my sisters? Aren't they? He goes, they're fine. It's you and your brother. So anyhow, so we moved to Michigan, and we got 200 chickens, 20 cows, 4 horses. My dad worked for the state, my mom for that. And what I would say is understanding the responsibility of keeping these lives going of these animals was a huge responsibility. And if, in the winters you had to go out really early, break the ice so the cows could feed, and if you didn't do that, you could see that they struggled. So from taking responsibility, it was a great gift from my parents that they made that sacrifice. And I think for my mom, letting us come to work with her was also really important. One of 4, older brother, older sister, younger sister. And so, that, let's see, I ran cross country. That was my thing. Because when I would get frustrated feeding the cows and chickens, I would running. What was that? Who was that guy that would run forever? That's what I would do. Just run and run. Forrest Gump. That was. Exactly. It was a Gump moment, and I would just go 10 miles, however, till I was ready to come back to the joy of it. My son ended up running distance for Michigan State University, so some of that
So there's
move through.
there's a D1 athlete in the family.
There absolutely is. Yep.
So tell us a little bit about school. So it was a rural area, presumably. So we went to high school. Were you interested in sciences, or what were you?
Yeah. So when I was 5, I remember early, I wanted to try to make a difference, and I did think that being a doctor would be the thing. I was sick when I was little, and I survived that, so it was also a part of what I thought. So I was I can also talk about deviations in the road. I mean, I'd be glad, but what happened is 8th grade, I was an all-A student all the way through, and then I felt, well, kids don't like me because I'm an all-A student. Actually was, because maybe I wasn't that interesting a kid, I don't know. So I got a little bit sidetracked. But then it was my junior year that I said, I've got to really focus. I did love the sciences. That was an area of focus for me. Chemistry, physics, math were interesting. But it wasn't that advanced in education, so I took a little bit of everything. I delivered pizza, so that was part of my gig. And then I got a Class C chauffeur's license so that I could drive the bus for my mom, for the patients, the individuals there. So that was also a nice way to connect. And I think how I did well in school was I was also a night watchman in a facility that was 100 years old. And so I couldn't sleep because it had steam pipes. It was scary. So I would be able to study mostly through the night. So I guess in summary,
you had some interesting experiences.
I had many, many interesting experiences along the way that were formative.
So now we can get to Michigan State, because that's a place you've spent a little bit of time over.
Yes.
So you went to college close to home, right?
Close to home, yes, sir.
But tell us a little bit about that experience and then when you started. Obviously, you're thinking about being a doctor, but that's probably when you're starting to get serious.
So went to Michigan State, and my freshman year, I got a 2.5 in chemistry and a 2.5 in biology. And I said, well, this could be a problem. And Dr. Spies saw me somewhat disheartened after that first term. And I guess one point about that is the difference one teacher can make. And he said, I think you have more in you than a 2.5. He said, let me help. And so ultimately, one blessing of this was the ability to ask for help. And now as a faculty member, being very vigilant to see if people are struggling, because it doesn't take a lot to lift people up, but there are a lot of gates that can discourage. Another lesson that I learned in my journey was not to hinge my self-concept on how I do. And there's a lot of pressure and stress to do that in these journeys. So ultimately, I ended up being a TA for chemistry and for physics, and I was a biology major. And some of the challenge just was I came from a high school where I didn't have access to some of the educational background that some of the other students didn't. So I got crushed my first semester, but again, with focus and support and belief of a professor, ultimately that ended up being a big part of my journey.
Sometimes finding, especially at a big state school, connecting with a professor early on, did he seek you out, or did you say, hey, this isn't working, and how did you guys connect? Because I know you've maintained a connection with him all the way through your 4 years.
Yeah, the way it happened was I was taking a test, and it was on thermodynamics, and I raised my hand and I said, Dr. Spies, I don't know if this is the right question to ask you or if it's okay, but I made up a formula. Will this work? And he just laughed for a bit and said, no, probably not. Probably should have done that problem set, but meet me after.
Right.
And I think some of it was having this positivity and this outreach, but then actually following up on the invitation to come, I think was important. So taking the time to reach out to professors and being comfortable persisting, I think, was key. Yeah. And I think it was also an alertness to finding a professor that I felt I could connect with as a person, and not just because he had the title of professor of chemistry. So I did. So I looked chemistry, physics, biology, and there's something about Dr. Spies that communicated caring, and I felt like if we could connect on caring, we could figure everything else out.
Excellent. So you've had a good work career already. You went to Michigan State. After your initial experience with biology and chemistry, it seems like things turned in the right direction.
Yeah, I got to give the valedictory address, and so I did flip it, right.
That's a pretty impressive switch.
We made a comeback.
Exactly.
Yeah, to be certain. So, yeah,
but by the time you were the valedictorian, were you pretty sure medical school was the right track?
Yes, okay. I was sure. I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I was really enthusiastic about it. Maybe an interesting thing was my senior year, I had a philosophy course.
Okay.
And I met a philosophy professor. My professor said, "Do you want to see what I do when I'm not teaching philosophy?" And so the other is to be curious and learn about your professors. And I said, well, I would. And turns out he was a philosophy teacher, taught economics. He was a horticulturalist. He was a lawyer, had an MBA. He was a family medicine doctor, and he was the chair of the Department of Radiology. So when he gave me a tour of his department, I was accepted to go. I was going to go to the University of Michigan for med school, but I met him, and I was so inspired by this Renaissance person. And then he showed me MRI of the brain, because I was going to be a neurosurgeon. And when I saw this, I said, if you can see disease, maybe you can cure it. Oh. And there's some takeaways from that. One was the curiosity. 2 was I decided to stay at Michigan State because I wanted to learn underneath somebody who was so inspirational.
Plus, you wouldn't want to go to Ann Arbor unless it was absolutely necessary, right? Okay.
Exactly. Thank you. But one of the things he stressed was that advances in medicine, advances in society happen at the interface of disciplines. So that would be a takeaway for you guys, is I think one of the big successes that the way I've been able to be successful is he said, I'll get you a scholarship to medical school, which was good. He said, but you got to commit the rest of your life. Half of what you read is outside of medicine. And so that has been just really important because that's allowed me to connect.
So, but you also, I've observed that you not only are well-read and knowledgeable outside of medicine, but you do approach partnership with an intentionality. And was that when you started to see the advantage of seeking people out who aren't necessarily in your department, in your program? Yeah. Maybe say a few words, because that is a characteristic of your leadership.
Yes, there's Helen Keller said, alone I can do so little, together we can do so much. And I really believe that. I also think that there can be a tendency to want to be the smartest person in your group. But in fact, if you surround yourself with people smarter than you in domains, you can move faster and do more. I would say that it was probably, in medical school where I would seek out study partners to work with that had different backgrounds, and that was very helpful. But subsequent to that, everything has been about connecting to groups. Maybe I'll give one example.
Sure, please.
Is that when I was at Hopkins, that's where I did my residency and fellowship, I had a patient come in who I couldn't help. They'd had a stroke, and it was really frustrating to me. And ultimately, I realized it was because the way that we imaged the human brain, we measured electron density. So what I wanted to see was, could we invent a way to better image the brain? So I just walked around the halls of Hopkins and I found a physicist and a physiologist, and we came together to then help advance this thing called diffusion imaging, which is micromolecular motion of water. And I did not know a ton about eigenvectors and physics, right, and some of the physiology, but I knew that I could help them with what they had discovered to understand the purpose of it and the challenges we were trying to solve. And so that was kind of the start. Maybe one more example was when I was at the University of Washington. I was a department chair of radiology, and I wanted to try to improve cost and access. So I went across campus and I went to the chair of industrial engineering. And I said, could we have your students do their capstones? But I think everything is at the interface of disciplines. And you, as this great leader in policy, is a fine example.
Well, I do think it all comes together, but it's not the way we teach, and as you all know, is historically has been in silos or tunnels, which is important because you want depth, but it's also working horizontally as well.
Completely agree.
But so now you're a physician, and so tell us, when did you decide that radiology would be what you wanted to focus on? Was it this experience and then you went where did you do your residency?
Oh yeah, so some iterations of that was when I decided to focus on radiology. First, my mom was like, "Well, what's a radiologist?" So there was helping to understand that. But what I did is residency is 4 years. Then I did a fellowship in neuroradiology, and those were all at Hopkins. I joined the faculty, and I was practicing as a diagnostic neuroradiologist. So what that means is patients are evaluated, you interpret their scans, you integrate clinical information, and you help map a path. After we helped invent a way to better image the brain, then what had to happen was you needed to remove the blood clot from the brain. And since we had been involved with discovering it, the people that I would normally call were not convinced it was the right thing. So that was when I did another fellowship, so that I then trained to be a physician. And what I did or do is I put a catheter in the femoral artery, I run it up over the heart into the brain, and you grab the clot, you pull it out, or you lyse it. So part of this was the importance of a multidimensional career. What you decide at the start doesn't necessarily determine what you'll end up doing. And I think being alert to, here's an unmet need, can I help address it, but then say, well, where does that leave things now? And can I build on what I've learned to take things even further and develop new collaborations? And so that progression was what took me to being then a neurointerventionalist at Hopkins, where I would diagnose and treat patients with aneurysms, also treated minimally invasive or strokes.
Wow, and so how long did you stay as a practicing physician at Hopkins before you took your next big step?
So this sense of urgency I talked about with my mom, I maintained it. So I graduated from fellowship in '97, and then I practiced for 3 years. Got frustrated that medicine seemed to be run by Gestalt. So then I got a grant to get a degree in biostatistics, but I still practiced there.
While you were taking.
So then I came back with that degree and started to do both, but I ended up in 2002, so 5 years, I was asked to be the chair of the department, which was reasonably quick.
Yep.
And then I was recruited to the University of Washington, where I did clinical. So from 97 to 2016, I would say 19 years, but then I balanced the portfolio.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the balance when you shifted out to University of Washington, because that was then you had institutional responsibilities there. So you want to tell us a little bit about
So when I was in Baltimore, I did 4 days clinical, one-day research, which was a good mix. When I became a department chair first at Hopkins, then the University of Washington, I oversaw 5 hospitals. And so to do that, then I decreased my clinical. And people asked me, well, don't you miss doing clinical? Mm-hmm. And the answer was 100%. My guiding factor, my faith matters to me, is where can I do the most good? And so it wasn't about what would be the most fun thing, because that would be doing neurointervention. Mm-hmm. It was, how do you create a scalable impact in the world? And I felt that if I could be involved with optimizing clinical care across 5 hospitals and training the next generation of clinicians, that would be a reasonable trade-off, and then I would do my clinical work. So that was the way that I divided that up.
We talk a little bit in this class about, with each of our speakers, about their North Star. Which could be, a religious motivation, it could be an ethical motivation, right? But how that can be integrated into your career choice. So it seems like you made a conscious decision at every stage here. But I thought maybe I'd give you a chance to elaborate a little bit more about how you go about the process of discernment. Obviously, everyone comes at this from their own traditions, but if you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, it is. I think I'm always looking for how I can do the most good, and so I will be alert to, maybe another way to say it, I approach life as a gap analysis constantly. So I'm studying all of you, study people walking down the hall, I study John, and it goes all the way back to when I was 5. I read this book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I don't know if you've read it.
I have, because I'm closer to your age.
Yeah, well, you should get this
you have,
book.
all right.
It's about this little seagull, right, who wants to fly higher and higher. And everybody says, that's stupid, you're a seagull, right? But what the little seagull does is he studies other seagulls, and then he finds one that can fly really high. He says, what's that seagull doing that I'm not doing? And so it instilled in me at a young age, if I just study people and continually try to close the gap, it would help me one day to fly as high as I'm called to fly. And it's never about judging others as less than. It's saying, what's the best version of me? So one has been this idea that we live with a purpose. God creates us with a purpose, and that by having this really positive approach of learning from others, there's not really a limit to how high you can fly if you combine that with surrounding yourselves with others. And so that has been, but what I have done is when I would meet someone and say, wait, as a department chair, it looks like they're able to have a more scalable difference, I would then say, well, what would it take to do that? Not because of the power part, but because of the impact part. And so I guess that's the other thing in some of the discernment. But the other, I'll take this job as an example, was that I was executive vice president for health sciences at Michigan State. We had 7 campuses. We were impactful. But what I felt was that I feel still too many people feel alone in their time of need. And I thought that if I could use my faith and health, and you could bring them together correctly, we could really be an exemplar for people never feeling alone in their time of need. And so it was taking the time to say, would that be a way to do more good faster than I was able to do in my prior role? I also felt that there we had been able to improve health for the state of Michigan, where I grew up. I promised my mom I would come back at some point and do that. And we did that, spent 8 years. But then I felt like at Georgetown, we could improve health for the nation and the world. And so that was what really brought me here. But I actually sat on campus, I walked around, I talked to students, I sat in the church, I went in the hospital, and I really thought about, because it was never, I want this job because it'll be like this cool next thing. But it was also accepting the responsibility that if I took the job, I would immediately have a responsibility to Georgetown, the students, the faculty, the staff, the community. So some of the discernment too is, am I ready? Am I prepared to do this in a way that would be meaningful?
So heads up to Caroline, you'll start us off. But one more question, I think. I mean, it seems to me that at Georgetown, and certainly at Michigan State and at the University of Washington, you spent more of your time, no, not all of it, in organizational leadership roles. So it's a different way to use your talent.
Yes.
And you clearly have a passion for the work you did, the clinical work you did. In part of leading an organization is that greater impact. Like, I get that. But it also means that you decide that that's how you want to create impact. Like, so I guess I'd love your reflection as a leader of at least two academic, well, really three, given the role you played at University of Washington. How do you feel about leading in medicine now? And like, how do you think it taps into your strengths? Because you clearly found something that works.
Yeah.
Because some of our students here will be clinicians. Some of them will do many other things in their lives. But leading organizations is a big part of what you've done.
Yeah. There's a saying. It goes something like this: if your words and actions cause people to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, I think it was John Adams, then you're a leader. And so for me, I just got, as you go along, you see what lifts you, what inspires you. And like, I found, like, mentoring students, I was like, this is super awesome, right? And it just left me feeling happy and engaged, and you could see them growing and accomplishing their goals. And so then it was, is there another level of inspiring you can do? And so at every point it was being alert to, well, what lifts you, what inspires you as well. Because if you love it, you'll do more of it. And I would say now I don't do clinical, even though I loved it, but just the idea of creating, we're working with 55 countries in the African Union to develop health systems throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And the chance to be a part of that scale was a trade-off. But the idea that, how do I feel about leadership now in health? First, sometimes you'll ask people, what do you think about being a doctor or being a leader in health? And they go, oh, it's a horrible time and it's all garbage. Ignore that. I think it's a beautiful, amazing, transformative opportunity. And now more than ever, we need stewards of hope. And now more than ever, people need access to health and hope and healing. I feel blessed every day coming to work. And I see these challenges as opportunities. And I also see that when people come with maybe a little bit of energy and might feel like they're coming at you, one of the insights is almost never are people coming at you. They're coming to you. They need help. They feel lost. They're struggling. And if your action, reaction, logic is that people aren't coming at you, they're coming to you, then it makes, even in these difficult times, the world a super friendly place where you can bring healing and be transformative. And I think that if you have that orientation, you're similarly a steward of hope. I think that you can unleash such potential, and you can help lift up people's families because they come to work and they feel cared about, they feel loved, they don't feel alone. So there's also the echo you have with families and all of it. So do I like it? Yeah, I do. I love it. I feel really blessed to have the opportunity. So yeah.
It's a perfect transition. Thank you. Carolyn, do you want to kick us off? Especially since you've read Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which I think is wonderful.
My dad actually made me read it when I was younger.
That makes sense.
Right? It's awesome. You should read a book. It's a great book. It's a quick read.
It is a quick read.
Thank you again for taking the time to speak with us today. You've emphasized throughout your career from helping establish cross-university research centers to even more global efforts, that meaningful progress in health comes from interdisciplinary partnerships. So my question for you is, how can students begin to meaningfully engage in these collaborations early in their training and career, especially when they may not yet have the same technical expertise or institutional authority as others in the industry?
It's great. Thank you. Thanks for your thoughtful question. I saw how you all prepared for this. It was really cool. It's great. Yeah, bless you. So maybe one way, but iterate if I don't answer, okay, correctly. So when I got to Hopkins as a resident, I was like, ta-da, I'm here, bring on the mentors, right? Where are they? Or you guys, right, I'm at Georgetown, or I'm in this master's program. It didn't quite happen that way. And so what I then did is I said, is there somebody who's accomplishing a great deal that I could connect with? And they weren't in my same discipline. So I sent them a note, and there was 0 response. But I was like, why is that? So I sent another 0, sent a third, nothing, right? And this was a person who wrote like 800 papers. By the time they were 50, they played basketball, their family liked them, their kids were happy. So you don't want to pursue people that don't have that. But then I said, wait a sec, I realized the challenge. He's got a bunch of people sending this. So what I did is I studied him, and I found out, what does he like to do? And what he wanted to do was submit abstracts to meetings, posters. And so what I then did is I wrote him a note, and I said, Doctor, you don't know this about me, but I love making posters. There's few things I love more than making posters. Immediate response, come meet with me, let's make posters. So then I made posters, but what I had also done in studying him was to see that he flipped relationships, and he had mentors that he helped be successful. So one way to do that is to look about and find somebody who is in these domains that you see as accomplishing things or could add in your gap analysis, and then recruit them, not just by asking, but by studying them and finding out what will engage. And I tell you, I've repeated that over and over and over again. The next was this person who was awesome at writing grants, but with writing grants, he had a bunch of MR scans that had to be read. The fellows ran the other way. And I was like, if I could learn how to write grants, I could protect my time. So after 3 no responses from this person, I then wrote a note, and I said, Dr. Blah, you know what I love more than anything is reading MR scans. Ding, calls me. So worst case scenario, I learned how to read MRs from the best MR reader at Hopkins. Best case scenario is what happened on a Saturday where he called and said, well, I got another grant I'm putting in, you want to be PI? And so, 2 years into faculty, I'm running a trial with 6,000 people in 4 communities. So it is that idea of being open, saying yes, gap analysis, recruiting people, and starting with bringing value before you seek it, I think are some of the ways that I found really successful.
PI defined?
Oh, sorry. Principal investigator, which is the person that oversees the grant. If you oversee the grant, resources come. But I think that's a way, is to reach out. And I was just this somewhat ill-formed in my journey, and I brought enthusiasm and an understanding of what also valued to them. And that goes a long way. Fair? Okay, good.
Maya?
Thank you so much for coming to speak to us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Hearing about how you kind of transitioned from clinical practice to working more in education and leadership, I think is really interesting and a new aspect of working in medicine that I hadn't thought about. So I was wondering what skills and experiences from your clinical practice have transformed how you approach both education and leadership in your current role, or the roles that you've had in recent years.
Yeah, that's great. So what skills from my clinical practice translate to how I educate and how I lead? Perfect. I think one of the things that has affected how I lead is as it comes to training medical students and residents. When I did neurointervention, I was putting catheters up in people's brains. And so if there's a mistake, the patient can have a stroke, they can have a brain hemorrhage. What I had to find a way to do was to help the medical student or the resident be prepared and yet not have them feel like I was this mean old, grumpy old, you got to do it this way or that way. What I learned was the way to form that connection with the trainee was to help them understand what was at stake, what was expected of them, how the person really was depending on us and their family was. And so as I've come into now training medical students and residents, the idea that I bring from my clinical experience how to set clear expectations, how to build trust, but then I also remember as a medical student being really intimidated and being really afraid, and knowing that when you had that grumpy attending who didn't explain why they were asking what they were doing, why they took the catheter back. So it really was the combination of seeing it from both sides that I think has really helped me put in place this mutual respect in the learning environment that's helping position our medical students for success, helping our patients get the best care, but also helping, as I'm guiding my faculty, what I expect from them. One is to provide clarity about what's expected, but also do it in a nurturing and empathic way. And so had I not been in that, I think the second answer to the question is that when I was a clinician, it helped me see there's a ladder, and I'll describe the ladder for you because it's how I've constructed everything ever since. So when I was as a neuroradiologist and I couldn't help the patient, the first thing I would always do is go up to existing knowledge and say, is it because I'm not taking existing knowledge and moving it to the clinic? How long do you think it takes from recognizing the best idea, what works, to it actually being practiced clinically? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? How long? 15 years. So what that taught me was I got to find a way to close that, right? 1. 2 was that sometimes then discovery is the solution, and that's what then led me to developing the diffusion imaging. But I made sure that I first looked to see, was it just that I wasn't aware? And then you carry it and then you translate it. So what that has resulted is my passion for, you got to connect the research and the education and the clinical, and it should be driven by what couldn't I do for my patient today that I couldn't solve. And so a lot of my successes have been, how do you inextricably link those? Because in some places they sit separately. So something I did in my first 6 months here was this greater integration of the basic sciences into the medical school. Does that make sense? And so taking that to scale has allowed me then to grow programs significantly. Yep. You're welcome.
So, Jessica?
Thank you for everything you shared today. I think your attitude towards your career and decisions is really admirable. Something cool that I found while looking into your work is that you helped establish a Seattle Free Health Clinic.
Yes.
Which is in the United States, the largest community free health clinic. And I was wondering sort of how you brought interdisciplinary resources together to create that, and also sort of it's just so interesting to me, but like establishing it, bringing resources together to establish it, and then also I guess experiences that led you to, which you kind of talked about earlier. But
yeah, it's great, and I think so much of what I've tried to do is continually build on what I've learned in the journey. So thank you for referring. I was walking to a baseball game with my son, going to a Mariners game, and there was a person that was homeless, and it saddened me, and I thought to myself, when is someone going to do something about it? Then I was running our practice plan, and then I realized, I was wondering when someone's going to do something about it, then I realized I was someone. So
do you want to say a word about what a practice plan is?
Oh, yeah, so sorry. Yeah, so thank you, jargon boy.
It's okay.
So I essentially was responsible for the 1,600 doctors at the University of Washington. We had a 5-state reach. And one of the things that can happen is I felt like I was optimizing my department, which was radiology. But then I thought, well, could I do it for surgery medicine? Scale is something that gets me fired up. And because we had done well in one, then they said, guess what? Would you be willing to do both? And I'm like, yeah, I can do both. So I was doing that. But then as I was walking with my son, who he was like 5, and I was like, what could we do better? So that was then when I said, well, I'm somebody. So it led me to find some colleagues, and we came together and we went to the Seattle, where the Seattle Supersonics played, and we asked if we could borrow their stadium. And they said, well, how long do you need it for? I said, just 6 days. And he said, 6, what are you going to do with our stadium? So what we said is we were going to turn it into a free clinic. And people said, well, that's a stupid idea. So never first be deterred by people who think it's a stupid idea if it's for the right reasons. But what we then did is we said, can we turn this into a free clinic? And it was all interdisciplinary because we didn't have money. We just had a stadium. And so what we then did is we just started reaching out to the community, to multiple health systems. We recruited 100 dentists. We had 100 dental chairs. We found out that shoes go out of style, so we got 4,000 pairs of Brooks shoes donated. Glasses go out of style, so we got glasses because the gaps in healthcare, often dental and vision, they contributed. And then we put together these interdisciplinary clinics. That we had 24 clinics, nurses, doctors, PA, chiropractors, social work, mental health. And what we found was that people want to do good for others. You have to just try to make it easier. And so we had translators, we got dogs donated that were stress dogs. And people said, well, no one's going to show up to this idea, right? We've opened it. 4,000 people in 4 days. And then they said, well, this is a bad idea. I said, well, you can ask people, you can listen to them, they can help you construct it. And so this was a clinic also of the community. And when we asked, how did we do, 97% said they felt cared about. You can go to any hospital in our country and say, what percent feel cared about? And it was because we led with love, we listened, we built systems, and we recognized that the people we served they were an asset. They knew what we needed to do. So we did it together, but it was all interdisciplinary. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary of this, and one of the things that inspired me to go back to Michigan and try to create something on scale was the idea that if you can do this in a free clinic, can you do this in hospitals and outside? But so much of it was understanding that to do something on scale, it takes people of broad expertise, policy, law, social work, community leaders. What made me think that I could maybe be a part of it was that, and this is kind of the interesting thing, is once I got that grant from that person where I was taking care of 6,000 people across the country, I said, well, what's my new gap? My new gap was I knew nothing about running a study with 6,000 people. So I used that to get a grant, to get a degree in biostatistics. But then when I came back to the department, I said, it seems like we do healthcare by Gestalt. So that was then when I brought biostatistics to systems optimization. And when I went to Seattle, and we talked about, could we bring in the Department of Industrial Engineering? So it was just this idea that if you unleash the industrial engineers on top of the rest, of course you could take a clinic up to scale. So hopefully that didn't seem like a really scattered answer. Hopefully that was completely systematic, but it was what was the need? And then it haunted me. It was like, this isn't right. It's not just, I can't not do something. And I knew that I could find other people who felt the same. And if you have a small group of believers, there's no limit to the good you can do. And so that was the thing. Yeah, thanks. Yep.
Tiffany?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much again for being with us tonight. So this is related to one of our class readings where you told your medical school story about the patient with metastatic cancer whose code status you corrected. And your intervention really relied on your willingness to sit with the patient long enough to understand them fully with empathy and humility. And my question is, how do you recommend clinicians preserve that kind of presence, especially in a medical system that's really structurally designed for efficiency?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for reviewing that as well. So one of the things that's important, maybe I'll give a minute and a half intro to it, was my junior year of college. If I can go off the menu for just a touch.
Sure.
My kind of whole world fell apart. By this I mean, I was getting ready for the MCAT, and my closest friend said, I don't think I can pass the MCAT. And I said to this person, you're the smartest guy I know, sorry about that. If you can't, maybe I can't. And in a matter of about a week, the world went dark. It became completely impossible. And what I realized was that it wasn't that I was taking a stupid test. I was seeking to validate my whole purpose on the planet, which were really high stakes, versus saying, maybe I don't do well on the test the first time. There's lots of other things. It doesn't mean who I am. But I learned after this 3 months of darkness that you cannot hinge your self-concept on how you do. And so that became almost a superpower for me then. It was like I was going to listen, learn, I'd strive, I'd make mistakes. So that is a setup to maybe coming back to what this was then I was a medical student, and I was on rounds, and we went into the room with a patient who had advanced cancer, and the chief surgeon said to the man, you need stents for your kidneys. And the man said, I don't want stents for my kidneys. And then we walked out of the room, and the chief surgeon wrote in the chart, this person is a no code. So, meaning that he was a PI. No, meaning that if the person had a heart attack, don't do anything. Because this person had declared, by virtue of not wanting the stents, which are tubes you put in your kidneys when they're obstructed, that it essentially said, I don't want anything done for me and I'm ready to die. Going back to my story, it was like, well, that's not right, and I might get in a bunch of trouble, but I'm going to go back and talk to this man. And I went in the next morning really early, and I sat with him, and I said, why didn't you want the stents? Which nobody asked. To your point, it was next patient, next patient, next patient. One of the blessings of being a student is you have more time, right? And so that is part of the answer. Is one of the benefits of healthcare, where you have medical students and you have residents, is they sometimes have more time, or they take more time. So I took the time. That was first. Second was because I took the time to get to know my patients. I wanted to find out. He's a very smart man. And he said, listen, they told me I needed another procedure. I had the procedure done. And then they later told me I didn't need to. So it's not that I wouldn't ever consider having these tubes. I just want to wait a little bit longer. And so it was the idea that taking the time to do the right thing is what's required of you as a physician. And no, there may be pressures to move faster. Mm-hmm. Find efficiencies in other places, but don't bypass getting to know and understand what your patients need. Now, sometimes there's other ways to do it, right? Because you have a healthcare team, right? So it's seeing that the nurses are always really connected to the patients and taking the time to listen to them because they spend the time interprofessional. The students, don't be dismissive, listen, learn. And I think one of the blessings of AI is some people would say, oh no, AI is going to be the end of physicians. But in fact, AI can be a tool so that you're not looking at your computer putting things in, but you actually can focus more on being with the patient. So I also think it's leveraging technology to give you the capacity to be more in the moment. So that's what I would say. And if you stick with purpose and why you're a clinician in the first place, then it just won't be acceptable to not make sure you deeply understand what your patients need and what your families need. And I also, when I was in charge of all the clinicians at the University of Washington, I took them through this training, which they didn't think they needed, but ultimately we did, which is just this idea that with a simple algorithm, you can make sure you do it. And so it's called AID IT. You acknowledge who's in the room and you introduce yourself. You say, how long are you going to be there? Right? And then you explain why you're there and what you're doing, and then you thank people. It takes about 60 seconds, but it changes the whole tone of it. And so sometimes, too, it's making sure in your training that you build in some algorithms so you don't forget that it doesn't take that long to help people feel cared about and listen. So there's that, too.
Thank you. So I think I'd like to now open this up to other students in the class.
Yes, please.
You want to start us off?
For being here. You've spoken really powerfully about your relationships with individual patients, showing that love and care, and then also working at scale and wanting to have as big of an impact as possible.
Yeah.
When you're working at scale, how do you keep in mind the individual stories and communities and not getting, say, impersonal when you're working across countries?
It's such an important question because you can lose touch with your why. And I did that. You know, one of the things that we referred to in that session about what happened there was acknowledging your failures. That was the other part why I brought up failures, because I've had a lot of them. You learn from them. And one was when I got to a job, there were so many things broken that I just stuck in my office and fixed them and thought, okay, the people around me are seeing all these fixes. It's great. It's awesome. Fixes everywhere. But then there was a point where there was this crisis where 7 of the faculty left because they didn't feel cared about. And I said, well, how did that happen? I talked to them. I said, look, I fixed all these things. They said, we don't know you. Right? And so one of the things is that I try to build into whatever I'm doing to make sure that people know me. And so one of the things I do with the schools is I try to just do rounds and be visible. Now, our dean of the School of Health is this amazing present person. He does great. In my role as dean of the School of Medicine, that's where I try to be engaged that way. But then it's also going to the communities. The free clinic was a nice way, because although I wasn't in the clinic, in the hospital, this was a nice way to be reminded. So I try to find myself into situations that do make sure that I don't forget, because that's what lifts you up. It's a really good thing. And if I had to think about what was the hardest, it is that, I used to teach every single day. I used to see patients every single day. So it is just reminding. And then for me as well, go to church on Sunday, and that's also kind of a nice connection to purpose and reminding of the why behind all of it. I'd say those are some of the ways. Thanks for asking.
Right. Other questions, Charles?
Yeah, so I really like kind of this notion of hope that you keep bringing up.
Yeah.
What right now has you most excited in medicine, healthcare? Like what kind of gets you fired up right now?
Yeah, there's so many things I'm super fired up about. You can tell Well, I could in the context of Georgetown. Let me give you one awesome Georgetown. There's a bunch. One of the things I'm fired up about is there's been a change in global health where historically, and again, I'm next to one of the world's leaders in how to do these things, but the U.S. would go in as the cavalry, right, with a lot of resources. Sometimes if you go in with a lot of resources, you don't listen. And if you don't listen, or the people defer to you, you don't surface the best ideas. Or if you do leave at some point with your dollars, you leave the country worse off because a part of their economy that would have been developed to make this possible isn't there. So what I love about Georgetown is we identified our focus is global health, but with an in-country sustainability is our path. And what's happened now is Georgetown is being recognized as the university that gets that. And so the Rockefeller Foundation came to us and said, and it's in part because there's this amazing person, Deus Pozira, who you may have met, but they've come to us to say, can we meet with the 55 countries of the African Union Development Association? And we did, and now they're coming here in the fall for a 5-day course where we'll work with them to develop what's the path to develop sustainable health in every one of those countries. And it's because we lead with trust, with hope, with listening, that we're now a sought-after partner to do something that has amazing scale. We signed an MOU with the Association of Public Health for the Bahamas, 26 countries. They're coming as well. And so this, what brought me here was, could I be a part of transforming health for the world? And the answer looks like it's an absolute yes. And so that's super cool, and that it's scaling in a way really, really quickly. But if I get a second, because I'm amongst friends, another thing I'm really excited about is another pillar is care closer to home, cancer care closer to home specifically. And what I'm excited about that is when my mom had cancer in Michigan, we had to travel 90 miles to get to where you could get the best care. And, we could figure it out as a family. Many families can't. But then my mom wasn't near her support group. And so one of the things we said is, what if we connected the strengths of Georgetown to the 400 sites of practice and 10 hospitals that MedStar has? We could absolutely bring cancer care to the people, from cellular therapies to early detection. And that also is going really, really cool and really well. So my belief with that is that we're going to be able to very specifically demonstrate it's possible and take it to the country. And the third, since we're on a run, is that one of the things that's so cool about a job like this is that you just meet people like this guy, or many people I've met who are like, boy, I can do more and be a part of better by partnering. And so we had a meeting, and John was there, and one of the people in the room was Tony Fauci. Another guy was Dan O'Day, who's the CEO of Gilead, which is this global company that invented a medication that if you use it, you can prevent infectivity of HIV. You only give it twice. And then we had a woman who was a leader in the faith communities here in DC who had established trust in a relationship. And as we were talking, Dr. Fauci said, well, can't we eliminate HIV in wards 5, 6, 7, and 8? And we're like, yeah, we can. So we're gonna. And so we're going directly at that, working with the mayor and the community. And so it's just this stuff. And then if we do that here, we can do it everywhere. But it's multidisciplinary. So I just couldn't be more enthusiastic about this awesome convergence and the possible and finding new ways to do it. Yeah.
Well, if that doesn't pump you up, I don't know what will. But what other questions? I saw another. Oh, here, Rebecca.
I'm just very curious about how are you able to navigate so many different values and these important jobs and still stay connected with your original sense of purpose without really feeling overwhelmed or burnt out?
Yeah, that's a really great question. One of the things is, because it's the sense of scale that you're hearing that I potentially have, that is like, how much good can you do? Back when I started, do I have time? I've got 4 minutes for this story, right? The first was, well, I'll go to the most important part of the story. I go on. I do. Was that I would go home after a day at work, and I would be talking to my wife or my 2 sons like I'm talking to you, looking right at them, but I was not there. I was at work thinking about problem 7, 22, and 54. Then I would go to work, and I should be there, but I was like, darn it, I missed my opportunity with Luke or Jake or Christina. So what I had to learn was that for every challenge I was taking, after consulting, I would have a plan, and I'd put that plan on the problem, and then I would put it in a box and not open it unless I had evidence that the plan wasn't working. And what that then allowed me to do was to be in the moment with my family, be in the moment at work, and have a virtually unlimited amount of challenges I could take on if I built teams, if I was collaborative, if I developed plans correctly. Now, I would still occasionally wake up at 4 in the morning, and what I used to do then is I would just go, oh, I gotta get back to bed. But then I would then go, wait a second, there must be a plan that is not a good plan. And so I would identify where that was, and I go, all right, tomorrow morning, I'm getting the team together, we're gonna redesign the plan, but then I could go back to sleep. So some of it is that. I think the other is that when I was an assistant professor at Hopkins, I had this amazing boss, Elias Zerhouni, who went on to head the NIH. Yeah. And Dr. Zerhouni said, you look like crap, Norm. And I said, thank you, Dr. Zerhouni. And he said, what are you trying to do? I said, well, I want to be a really good teacher. He goes, good, you should do that. I said, I want to be the great clinician, one of the greatest Hopkins ever seen. Okay, good. I want to be one of the best researchers that's ever been here. He goes, good. He goes, and you're committed to be a good dad and husband? I go, yep. And he said, and you're trying to do all those at the same time? And I said, yep. And he said, nope. He said, it's got to be like spinning plates. You got to get your clinical work excellent first. Don't get distracted. Make that super, right? Family first. Once that's going, then you connect and you say, how can I connect my teaching mission to what I'm doing clinically? So I said to everybody, I'll give all the lectures on stroke. Okay, so then it was aligned, right? And then I said, okay, in doing the teaching, where I'm teaching about it, people are asking questions and I'm practicing, I'm like, oh, that's where my research questions should come from. So this plate's humming, this plate's humming. Now I'm like, I'm going to build my research, but it connects to this, connects to that. So then every single thing's aligned. And because I would say, clinically, if there's an unsolvable stroke case, bring it to me. That was then the research. But it also helped me see who were the best researchers. And then once I had those plates going, then I could go to industry or write grants, and they would say, we want to fund this area because these people are doing this, which brought resources. And so it's also, when I was a kid, if there was there's something called a blue light special back, this dates me 1,000 times 1,000, but essentially they would be selling 2-for-1s and 3-for-1s. So I almost never do anything that's not a 2-for-1, 3-for-1. The best example of that, I can talk super fast, that also helps me, is that when I was doing neurointervention at Hopkins, I had to learn all this neuroanatomy. But I had a 1-year-old who would never sleep, and the only way to get him to sleep was to take him in a station wagon. So I had to be learning and taking my son around in a station wagon, tired, bad idea, but then I wasn't exercising. So then I realized that I could take my Sony Walkman, I could record my lectures, I could put them on my shoulder, I could papoose my son, I could get a used treadmill from JCPenney, so I could walk with my kid while I listened to my lectures, who slightly overheard them, get my exercise, be the world's best neuroradiologist. But turns out my son then went into interventional radiology because he overheard the lectures. So my point is that every single thing I do, I'm like, what can I connect? What can I connect? What can I connect? And so that it's some of those. It's those things. Because your legacy is your family. You got to be there. But it all can come together in this cool, awesome way. And it goes back again to the Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which is not to accept that there has to be a limit to your capacity. You just got to think about it a little bit more and ask other people that are doing it. 7 minutes, not 4, but John's my buddy.
That's all right, Donna. Rachel, did you have your hand up? No, I'm sorry. Other questions from folks in the class? All right. So with that, I think do we have some questions online? John?
This question is from Jake. As Georgetown prepares to welcome a new president, what do you see as the most important leadership priorities for the university right now?
That's a great question. Before I answer that, the final answer to the prior question is I involve my family in things at work, because invariably you'll have a tough day. And if when you go home you tell them about your tough studies or your tough day, they'll remind you why you're doing it and lift you up. Because it might sound like I'm like this happy elf, never sad, never down, but I have days. We all do. But when I go home, my sons will remind me of my wife or something. Going back to the most important thing, which is really good, I think the most important is convergence across the university. I think the solutions to the challenges we face as a world, we can get there, but we have to even further connect political science to law, to pedagogy, to psychology, to policy, to medicine, to nursing. If we think about AI as an example, we're not going to compete with Stanford in AI if it's a race to see who has the best engineering, right? But if it's, can we think about the ethics of AI and the policies related to supporting AI, and how do you go identify what are the greatest needs that you can solve and the pedagogy of it. So for us to be competitive in attracting the resources, the best students, the best faculty, I think to further convergence is the answer. And with the provost now, we've created this Converge Center in the Rice Building, which is to bring together the strengths of the university in this 16,000 square foot plate. And I think as we look at what are some of the financial challenges, like less funding for global health, less funding from the NIH, less funding for the safety net, if we can bring these strengths together, we'll be a magnet for resources that will allow us to continue in these missions, and then ultimately attract additional resources to create experiential learning opportunities for the students. That's what it is. And again, I think that the first step is building the trust, understanding the culture. It's an amazing place. So the listening and learning, it starts there. But that's what I think. Convergence, that's the answer.
So the next question is from Lisa. As you transition from Michigan to Georgetown, what differences in institutional culture stand out to you, and how do those differences influence leadership in academic medicine?
That's also wonderful. The cultural differences, one of the things, like when I was at Hopkins, they said, you're way too nice, and it's a super competitive whatever. Washington, they had some other, Michigan State, Midwest, Happy Joyous, Georgetown. What I would say is, although on the surface there may be some cultural differences, I want to first get at underneath it, if you can apply to people's sense that people need to feel cared about, listened to, empowered. I have found almost all of the other cultural differences, they're not that relevant, and you can connect and drive. And so a lot of my discernment was just understanding that what people need is trust and caring and an opportunity to make a difference. In terms of some cultural differences, I think there is a deeper sense here than any other place I've been of we exist to serve others. It's really, really clear and really present more than any place I've been. And so what I would say is that the other places, again, amazing people, many committed. Hopkins had this unique commitment to excellence in patient care. But some of the academic motivations could sometimes be, I want to publish really important papers, or I want to. It didn't come down as clearly to this deep-seated sense that I exist to make the lives of others better. That is really, really clear and consistent here. And I think it's what's allowing me and us to move at light speed, because there's this common core value that you can attach to, I would say, is the unique thing here. I think the other is that Georgetown is a magnet for these people of huge ability, that I think the density of amazing ability per capita is also fairly unmatched. I mean, there's like, my first day I meet these Dr. Fauci. I think the connections, like my third month, I was asked to fly and meet with the Pope. I mean, some of the things you come into, I think Georgetown has the second highest number of people that work as representatives and senators. Those connections, I think, are really high. But, at Michigan, they had this deep commitment to serving urban and rural communities that was really cool, because they're a land grant. So I also would say that each one of the institutions had something that was really special that you could connect to, and that at its core, it was about doing more for others. And if you can appeal to that, there's no ceiling. But I would say about Georgetown, this is just really, really common. And the other thing I found on the med center side, and I'm sure it's the case for the rest of the university, is people get really happy and enthusiastic and inspired and come together if you can help them see that by giving a little, way more is possible together. There's just a huge openness to that. And as I find, I'm asking the faculty and the staff and the students to give a little bit more of themselves, to unleash a whole lot of good for everybody. There's a great openness to that. And that's also been really cool, really fun. Yeah.
So we got one more?
Yes. So this question is from Annie. If you had never gone into medicine, what other career path would you have chosen?
Yes. Teaching. I was going to either be, I thought, because teaching is a way you can have a scalable impact on the world. I saw this movie when I was a kid about these, I think it was third or fourth graders were asked how they would change the world. And one kid suggested I'll invent a money machine and a money tree and another. And then this one child said, I would ask each person to do two unsolicited acts of kindness for another person, and they would just be required to do two, and so on and so on and so on. So I kind of see education as that you're doing this unsolicited act of kindness for another, which empowers them to do good for lots of people. And so knowing that I wanted to have scale and impact, I thought by being a teacher, whether that was elementary school or middle school or high school or college, you could unleash a person's potential in a way that would be really awesome. And so I think that is partially what attracted me to academic medicine, because you can practice, but you can also teach and unleash this. I think also now one of the things that I'm working on, which are these innovation districts, recognizes that I can do every single thing in the clinic, but the biggest way that I can create social mobility and access to health and healing is if I can create opportunities for access to education for children, because if we can do that, that's also how you make the biggest difference. So I would be to be a teacher, but I never lost sight of if I can enable education in a huge way, that may be the most impactful way that we can improve human health. Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else in the room have? I knew. See, all I have to do is, please go ahead.
And thank you.
At Michigan State University, you combined the DO, OD, and nursing colleges under one structure. And I think last week they combined the DO and MD like even further. So I was wondering what you thought about like the future of integrated care, because MSU is such a big institution for DO.
Yeah, thank you. So for those of you that don't know, see how magical?
I know. I was very impressed that you anticipated this. This is good.
Thank you so much. Sorry. There's a doctor of osteopathy. Then there's an MD, which is allopathic physician. And they used to be very different. But when I went to medical school, I went to the MD school. My brother went to the DO school. We trained side by side. He's an orthopedic surgeon. My sister-in-law was also in that class. She was a DO, and she went into family medicine. And what I realized were we take many of the same classes. Now, society has this thing about hierarchying things, and MD is better than DO. And I was like, not really. My brother's actually smarter than me. And so one of the things that I felt when I went back there as dean of the MD school, we graduated 200 students a year. The DO school graduated 300 students a year, 500 students, 7 campuses. I just thought, why do they sit so far apart? And are there ways to connect based on the commonalities and still recognize the differences? And so I sat about ways to find greater connections, greater ways to educate together. And I think MSU may be the only school that has combined them, but I think there's an opportunity to bring them closer together. But what has happened is there used to be separate DO residencies and MD residents. So if you were a DO, do not apply to an MD program, vice versa. And the ACGME, which is the certifying for the MD and the DO, they've now brought it together. So the idea that if the residencies, which is what you apply to, are the same, it'll kind of back up to the training pathways as well. I don't know that they will combine them, but I think that the access to opportunities for DOs will increase. Yeah. One of the things that I have done, though, is part of, is this fair? I think that it's both sides that can close the gap. It's like working more closely with nursing. It's recognizing that without both having equal voice, equal power, we're not going to do as much good. I think it's also helping the DOs not say, well, the MDs, they just like to write prescriptions, right? That's not the case, right? But they were trying to get the support for themselves, so they called out that they have a greater focus on primary care. True. But the right answer is both disciplines care a ton about patients in primary care and the rest. So my point is that what I love about what Michigan State has done is they've gotten rid of the rhetoric that says we're good because you're not, as opposed to we're in this together and we all want to lessen struggles. And the president there, Dr. Kevin Guskowitz, came in and just said there's a higher level we can take it to, which I like. The other thing that I worked hard on was this idea of One Health, which is bringing the veterinary school closer, because so much of solving challenges is bringing those strengths, and the nursing school and allied health. Maybe one example was that we started an effort in Lansing to help take care of the homeless, and they would not show up to get better health care, even though we set up access to a free clinic. But when we said we were going to take care of their dogs, they would show up to bring their dogs and it was beautiful. And so when they were there with their dogs and there was trust, we could then do the free clinic. The other was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. There were 2 addiction specialists in the whole UP, but vet and one of the groups that really struggled with depression and addiction were farmers because of the stress and being alone. And we realized that if we worked with the veterinarians who visit the farmers and talked about how do you set up addiction programs, that was another way to partner to get care out. So long story short, to your question, greater integration is good, less separation is good. And I do see that there should be a trend towards working more closely together. Is what I think and what has happened there. Thanks for asking that question. You guys have the best questions.
Any other burning question?
Ask anything at all.
I'll ask you then.
Okay, thank you. Here it comes.
It would be hard to have spent the last hour and a half with you without just loving the enthusiasm.
Yep.
Your belief and hope and what we can do is really exciting.
Oh, good, thanks.
On the other hand, there are real challenges in the world,
Huge challenges. Right? Yes.
You know, depending on how you view it, there's public policies that cut against the kinds of things that we've been talking
100%.
about.
Yep.
There are economic changes in the delivery of health care that make it more difficult to do the kinds of things that you're talking about. We have a diminishment of trust in public health.
Yes.
That is markedly different from what it was even 5 years ago. So I guess I don't want to give up the hope and enthusiasm, but how do you process those real challenges that I know you see as clear-eyed as anybody here, that you choose a way to go forward? I guess it seems to me for students today, that ability to both recognize the challenge, as hard as some of them are, but also think about how do you move forward. I guess that's how
it's great. Really helpful. The idea that you see the challenges, at least for me, is a reminder of the persisting struggle and that something has to happen. And it would be very easy to just say, I can't because of. Does it make me angry? Yes. But it's a bit of a call to action and maybe an inspiration to all of you to see that there are so many domains in which you could contribute from policy to law, because if we think about policy as an example, there should be a policy that says moms in the 3 months before they have their baby and the 3 months after should have funding, because it's during those moments that you can prevent premature birth. And if we just think about our black and brown babies who have a 4 times greater likelihood of the babies not surviving birth, the idea that there's examples of policy changes that you can make that can address it. The defunding of Medicaid and the impacts that's going to have on the safety net, again, awful, really awful. But then again, I guess I learned that I can't sit with awful because it hurts and I feel helpless and hopeless. And so instead, my only way to react is to say, I can make it better. And there's this great story, the starfish thrower. Do you guys know this story? So the starfish thrower. So this boy is walking along the beach and there's all these starfish that are washed up on the beach and they're dying. And this little boy picks up a starfish and throws it in the water. Somebody comes up and says, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. This doesn't matter. Look at all these starfish. And the boy says it mattered to that one. And so just the idea that what I believe is that it's a call to action and say, yes, in this world of these struggles, what do you do to make a difference? So that's one. But then two, it's driven me to be even more consultative. So John oversees my advisory board. And one of the things that it's helped me see is that on my advisory board, I need somebody who's really locked down good at policy. I need someone who's really good at FDA and the regulatory environment. I need someone that's really good at marketing, believe it or not, to tell the story. So I think it also results in diving deeper to get more folks on the team so that you can be responsive. But no, I just can't help the orientation that it's just a greater call to action, and then maybe just touch on the empathy side, a little bit of it. Now this is recorded, so I might lose my, well, I don't care. Some might say, how did we end up where there's this possibility of devaluing higher education, and there's not this huge charge on the White House saying, what are you doing, right? This is insanity, you guys, right? But then you drive through West Virginia, or you drive through the Upper Peninsula, and you say, do those people feel included in what was going on? Do they understand that help was on the way, or the biggest challenges they face anybody gave a crap about? Excuse my language. You did not see that echoing from higher education, that we get your poverty, we get your job loss, we get your opioid addiction. So some of how we got where we got is, I believe, higher education became an internal echo chamber about why we were special and what was special, as opposed to saying, what are the biggest struggles society is having, and how do we make it crystal clear we're going at it every day. So I do think that when you see some of this awfulness, some of it is just awfulness and lunacy and idiocy, and God bless us all. We love all God's children. Now I got to go to confession for that. But then it is also recognizing that some of it is a reaction to hopelessness and people needing to feel heard and be seen. And so I think some of this is also doubling down and doing things that will be visible to those that are struggling, and helping them see that higher education is orienting itself very directly at what's causing you the pain and the struggle. And what I love about Georgetown is that is our orientation to it. So I think it's also owning the part that we can also do better in helping with it. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect place for us to end. But I want to ask everyone to join me in a round of applause for Dr. Beauchamp.
Oh, thank you guys.